It is I, Introspection, here to challenge the top VTubers to battle! That's right, Callie. It's not just Guru I'm after. I'm coming for you too. You thought you were safe just because you lived in the underworld? Well, guess what? I can transcend all dimensions! Okay, so now that I've properly managed to peeve off an apprentice of the underworld, let's see if I can get this video done before she comes for my soul, since, this may be the last one I ever make. But before we do that, let me say a couple things. First, I was a little nervous to actually make this video because it does involve quite a bit of psychology. And with psychology, it is a fair bit easier to misinterpret psychological information as opposed to other sciences. So I did spend a significant amount of time in comparison to my other videos doing research for this video. But with that said, if a therapist or a psychologist or whomever that may be actually professionally trained in this were to ever disagree with me, make sure that you actually only listen to me. Never listen to the trusted medical I'm kidding, guys! Do not listen to a random guy on the internet over medical professionals. That is not smart. Don't do that! Listen to the medical professionals. If they say that I'm not right, listen to them. Okay? Just want to make that clear. Alright. But again, I did spend quite a bit of time doing research to make sure I could get everything right. In fact, probably over double the amount of time I usually spend doing research. And as always, if you guys want to check out my resources, they will be down in the description below. Now on to the actual video. As I'm sure you have already figured out, this video is about communication. It's not restricted to any kind of relationship. These pieces of advice should work on any kind of relationship, whether it be with your romantic partner, or a family member, or even just your friend. You should be able to apply these to, again, any relationship. And you also have to keep in mind that even if you have a good communication set with your partner, or friend, or family, or whomever, that doesn't mean you can't get better. You can always improve communication, even if you have good communication right now. And, of course, the other thing is that not all of these things will work for everybody. Depending on who you're communicating with and what kind of dynamic you have with that person, then that's going to determine which of these tips, pieces of advice, will work for you. Now, if you are hesitant, I would understand, because a lot of the time when this information is presented to you, either they present stuff that just downright doesn't make any sense, or they present good psychological ideas to you, but they kind of only do it in a way that would only work if you were a toddler. So I'm going to try to avoid that. I'm going to try to speak to you straightforward, and I'm going to give you, as realistic as I can, examples of how these things can work. So, I want to start with what you probably already know. Simple form of communication. Person says thing. Thing is in transit. Other person receives thing. Communication complete. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you also probably already know, amongst this very simple process, there are multiple points where things can go horrifically wrong. Like just entirely off the rails, different from what you were trying to say, kind of wrong. Like, wow, not even close. And I find that more often than not, in several kinds of relationships, this is what leads to a lot of the problems. And they're often rectified by simply clarifying these miscommunications. To do this, we have to kind of focus on a couple different things. First of which, the part where we actually don't speak. I'm sure you've already heard this. Something like 70% of what we say isn't actually what we say. It's our body movements, our body language, as one would say, eye contact, stuff like that. Now, what's important to keep in mind here, and I think a lot of people forget, even if you are not annoyed at the person you are talking to, if you were previously irked by something else, and you are still irked when talking to that person, your body movement is still going to act irked, even if it's not toward the person you're communicating with. And if you're acting like that while communicating with said person, then it's going to come across like no matter what you say, that you are still irked at them. For instance, let's say, I don't know, you were at a college or university class, and you didn't have a great day, you kept getting all the questions wrong, you felt like an idiot, and later you went to go see your friend. If you're talking to your friend and you feel irked, there's a good chance that whatever you say to them, you're going to say it like if you were annoyed at them. If you say, "Oh, how's your day?" and your body language and even just tone of voice sounds more like, "Oh, how's your day?" it's going to come across like you're annoyed at them. And they're going to be either confused, understandably so, or offended. It's very simple to rectify this. Just make sure that to recognize that you're acting like it. And before the conversation even starts, to say, "Hey, listen, man," or "Listen, I haven't had a great day today. I apologize if I look or seem irked. It's not towards you, I promise. I just didn't have a great day. Alright?" Just go ahead and say it like that, or something to that effect. There are more scientific, pretty ways to say it, but I'm pretty sure that just annoys people more than anything else. And of course, this doesn't work on just friendship. This can also work in, for instance, a marital relationship. I mean, just the simple act of clarifying that the reason that you're annoyed or upset has nothing to do with the person you're married to can save you a whole heap of trouble and prevent arguments that have no business being there in the first place. Now, in relationship to this whole body language thing, also keep in mind that what you say is a lot less believable than what your body says. Like, okay, for instance, I know that you can kind of really only get the voice from this, but let's say I want to communicate to you, "I'm okay." Alright, and I say it like this. "I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay." Now, tell me, from any of those, would you actually believe that I was okay? Obviously not. Clearly, you could tell that I was not okay. Didn't matter how many times I said I was okay. It was pretty obvious that if I'm not acting okay, you're more likely to believe that I'm not okay. Alright? And that's why, another reason why it's so important that you clarify with the person before a conversation even starts that you're not annoyed at them. Because if you speak to them and they're taking your body language into account, even if what you're saying is by technicality nice, your body is going to tell them, take it as like they're annoyed at you. If you start the conversation off explaining that stuff was just crummy at work or school or whatever, then they know not to take your body account as directed toward them. You're just annoyed of what happened throughout the day. That, again, just make sure you clarify that because it can have that much of an impact on us. A very, very, very simple conversation. Alright, so to the actual speaking parts. This piece of advice is something called reflection. No, that does not mean go find the highest mountain in your area, meditate there for several years, reflecting upon the universe until you find the meaning of life, although there have been multiple studies proving meditation to be very beneficial to your physical and mental health, but that's not what I'm talking about whatsoever. What I mean by reflection is when somebody says something to you, and you weren't sure that's what they were trying to communicate, go and try to confirm that was the intended communication. I'll give you an example. I'm going to use a teaching example just because I think that's probably the easiest way to get this point across. For argument's sake, let's say martial arts class. That's just the first thing that pops into my head. And there is a sensei and there is a student. The student is practicing punching drills, right? And the sensei wants him to go slow. So the sensei continues to say, "Slow, go slow, student." Now the student is already punching at the speed that the sensei wants him to punch. And what the sensei is attempting to communicate is that he wants him to continue going that slow. But the way the student's interpreting it is he wants me to slow down. So in this situation, the student's best course of action is, when you say that, sensei, do you mean you want me to go slower, or this slow pace is what you want me to continue to do? The sensei, of course, will respond, well, this is the pace I want you to do. And thus, clarification is made, as opposed to the kid continuously going slow until he's pretty much not punching whatsoever. Now, this is obviously a teaching example, and you're usually not teaching the person you're trying to communicate with, but the same principle applies in, again, every relationship. If your partner or your friend or your family member says something and you think that's not what they were intending or trying to say, or you're not sure, it's worth the extra effort to make sure you clarify the intended message. Because, again, it's essentially a double-checking system, if you want to look at it like that. It's a way to make sure that, or double-check everything so that any miscommunications can be less likely to go through, basically is what I'm saying. Now, it's also very important to note that reflection is different from, like, a defensive attack. I know that I'm starting to use a little bit weird words, but I think you know what I mean. For instance, let's say I was wearing a suit. Obviously I'm not, but let's use our imaginations here. And somebody came up to me and said, hey man, you look super slim in that suit. The defensive attack version would be, what? You're saying I looked fat before? You're saying I don't look slim without the suit? Is that what you're saying? That is not reflection, guys. That's just going after somebody. It's very, very, very important you recognize the difference. Otherwise, you're going to end up causing more problems than solutions. Speaking of problems, let's actually move on to where you actually want to address problems in a relationship. Now, I know when I say that, your mind probably goes to, oh, he's going to talk about couples, or he's going to talk about marriage. And yes, they can definitely use this kind of advice, but it's not exclusive to them. This can work with family, friends, and even something as seemingly unimportant such as a coworker. If you have a relationship with somebody, whatever it may be, you have the potential to have problems in said relationship. So it's important that you recognize how to resolve those problems and better improve said relationship. Now, I'll hit you with the cliche first, just to get it out of the way. Be honest with them. Again, I told you it was a cliche, but as a cliche as it may be, you can't tell me it's not true. I think whether we do it or not, we pretty much all know it's pretty true. Even with the small things that inherently annoy you, granted, you can't expect somebody to change every little thing, and you can't complain over every little thing, because as much as you may love a person, there's no way you're going to find somebody who fits every little tiny thing you want them to do. We're human. This is not feasibly possible. But what I am saying is that if there are concerns that you actually want to address or you think need to be addressed, even if it seems small, try to at least communicate with the person about it, because things like this just continue to build and build and build until it explodes into like a messy fight, and I don't think anybody wants that. So try to be straightforward and honest with the person about things happening in a relationship, things that you are concerned about, again, whether it be friend, family, what have you. Now, it's probably best that before you do that, you at least think out how you want to tell this person. Because if it comes out wrong, then again, you're going to end up with more problems than solutions. You might end up turning a teeny weeny problem into like this massive deal in your relationship, which obviously you don't want. So if you want to address somebody concerning a problem, you probably want to give some thought ahead of time first. Think about how you're going to say this, how you're going to address it, how it is that you're going to communicate to the person so that you minimize the chance that they misunderstand it or they misinterpret it. So that's the first thing. Make sure you devote some time and make sure your words come out as clear as feasibly possible. Now the next thing, respect the other person's opinion. Now, I know where your minds are going. I don't mean just commit to agreeing with the other person. Don't do that. I mean, do that if you guys come to an agreement, obviously, but don't just submit to what the other person's saying. Okay? That's not what I mean when I say respect the other person's thought and opinion. What I mean is respect that the other person has that opinion. I'll give you an example. Let's say the other person thinks that pineapple pizza is delicious, and you think it's not. First of all, you're crazy. Bottom line. But if you weren't, what we would want to do in this situation is that respect that the other person likes that pineapple pizza. Doesn't mean you have to enjoy that pineapple pizza, but respect that they enjoy the pineapple pizza. And I know this seems like a very trivial matter, which it is. Realistically, this is not something most people would actually break out into a legitimate relationship fight over. But the same principle applies when you're talking about more touchy subjects within your relationship. Being able to hold their opinion in respect, even if you don't agree with it, helps out quite a bit. Because what happens is when you respect their opinion, you have an easier time communicating your thoughts as opposed to instinctively forming a verbal attack, so to speak. Just try to think about it like this. Think about it, this is something that somebody I care about thinks. Doesn't mean I have to think it, doesn't mean I have to agree with it. I just know that the person I care about has this opinion. Now, you are more capable of looking at it as, okay, let me relay the information or my thoughts to this person about that opinion, as opposed to let me tell him or her why he or she is wrong about this particular thing. That is what I mean when I say respect their opinion. Now, the other thing I want you to keep in mind, the mentality I kind of want you to have, is that when you're going into these kinds of discussions, keep it in mind that that's what it is, a discussion. It's not an argument, because that is, unfortunately, arguments are inevitable in most relationships. But that is the thing you want to try to avoid as much as feasibly possible. You don't want to intently go into an argument. A discussion, definitely. Things need to be discussed, even if the topic is hard to discuss. But you don't want to go into it with the mentality of it's an argument. Go into it with the mentality of it's a discussion. And hopefully, if you start out that way, ideally that's how it's going to end. Unfortunately, that's not always how it goes, but that's what you're trying to aim for. In the event where you guys have an argument or you start a discussion that turns into an argument, after the two of you cool down, you want to take the initiative to try to seek to repair the relationship. Because the longer this goes, the more miserable you guys are. And you guys might not even care very much about the thing you were arguing about. So it's best to at least try to repair the thing that you guys were arguing about. Unfortunately, as much as I hate to say it, that's not always feasible. It really depends on how open the other person is or how much time the other person needs to cool down or whatever the situation may be. But you should at least try to repair whatever it was that you kind of got you guys heated. Especially, or the other scenario that can happen if you don't do this is that you guys don't talk about repairing the whole situation, and then later down the line you have another argument. That previous wound, metaphorically speaking, can compound the other thing. So that's why it's so important to at the very least try to repair whatever argument you guys were having. Okay, so what's next on the... no. Okay. So I'm gonna have to go over this simply because I'm pretty sure I've seen just about everybody who's been trying to explain communication just really, really focus on these. The dreaded I statements. Now, as I'm sure you can tell, I'm not too fond of these things, but it's not because of insufficient science or bad principles. They have been shown to significantly help people communicate. My problem is that I've pretty much observed, and this is my observation, so please don't take it as actual scientific fact, but I've observed that just about everybody I've seen try to explain I statements, they do this weird combination of two things. The first of which is that they almost imply that they want you to just really, really, really focus on the I statements, almost to the point where that's all you focus on in discussion. Like, focus on the I statements, and everything will go really well, no problems after this, which I'm sure that's not what most of them were trying to imply, but that's kind of how they taught it, at least, again, from how I've observed it. And then the other thing is that they almost show you to speak in a very unnatural way with these I statements for some reason. Let me give you an example. Say somebody took my phone charger without my permission. The way they might want you to address that is, I felt my feelings negatively impacted because my phone charger was taken without my permission. And that made me feel right. Nobody talks like this. I guess in the scenario where somebody's upset at me and I'm trying to use the I statements, maybe they'll be too concerned about me to be upset at me. No, it's not that bad. But point is that nobody really speaks like the way they usually teach you the I statements. So I think what ends up happening most of the time is that people don't really take too much heed from the, because they end up thinking, okay, I sound stupid, nobody's going to listen to me if I try to speak like this, because they're probably not wrong. Nobody who's speaking like the way they're trying to use the examples is, at least that's not going to go down how you would want it to, usually. So a lot of people, again, will just be like, no, this is ridiculous, no, this is not going to work. Understandably so. So I guess with because again, the I statements can be very useful, but you have to know how to use them properly. We'll start with putting them in a good perspective. What I statements are, at least from what the research I've done and the best technology I can come up with, I statements are just an easier way to swallow the pill, essentially. A more digestible way to share information. And the way to make it so it's slightly less likely to incite a negative reaction from somebody. That's what I statements are. And the way to use them is not quite like that. You want to use them, but you want to make sure you sound like a person. to be frank about it. So, for instance, going back to the full phone charger thing, right? The way you would probably want to say is, look, I just get worried about when my phone charger isn't where I left it. I get a little worried. I think I lost it, or maybe that somebody took it. So, just next time you want to use the phone charger, please ask me for permission, just so that I know where everything is. Something like that. Obviously, it depends on how possessive you are of your phone charger and stuff like that. But you want to sound like a normal person. But that being said, using the I statements are better than not using the I statements. Generally speaking. Not always, but generally speaking. So, like, for instance, say we were talking, just for argument's sake, married couple. You forgot to take out the trash, or you forgot to do the dishes, right? The alternative would be, look, I like to keep the house clean, and it would really help me out if you just remember to do the dishes, right? Which one are you going to be less likely to, even if you say both of them in a really nice voice, you forgot to take out the dishes, versus I feel more at ease when I can come home and rely that the dishes will be done, whatever the case may be, right? So that's how you would generally want to use an I statement. And again, don't think it's like this magical thing where you start using it and everybody just instantaneously knows exactly what everybody's trying to think and say, and there's never any miscommunications ever again. Unfortunately. I really wish it was. That would be amazing if it was, but given the nature of things, it's just not. What it is, again, just an easier way to communicate and make it less likely to incite a negative reaction. Because that's essentially what you want when discussing touchy subjects with people. That you send a communication and make sure it comes across as a communication as opposed to an attack, in a manner of speaking. That's generally your overall goal when discussing touchy subjects. Now that pretty much concludes all of the research I've done over the couple hours I've been looking into this. But I've kind of drawn a conclusion from all of the stuff that I've learned thus far. And what I'm about to say isn't, as far as I know, on any solid scientific form or anything. So just keep that in mind before I say this. But what I've learned is that when you're trying to communicate with somebody, particularly about problems or touchy subjects or things like that, what you want to do is that you don't want to focus on telling them what they're doing, whether it's right or wrong. Well, I mean, you do, but that's a bit of a different scenario. I'm talking about just trying to resolve problems. When you're trying to resolve problems specifically, it's not a matter of trying to explain to them what they're doing. The philosophy that I think you should follow is explain to them the effect they're having. Explain to them the impact that they're having. Because they already know what they're doing. What they don't necessarily understand is the impact. Because in a lot of cases, if they knew what they were doing was impacting you to a certain degree, they wouldn't do it. And that's generally the problem. Not always, again, this is a case-by-case basis thing. But as a rule of thumb, for a lot of people, it's just the fact that they don't realize what they do or don't do has this kind of effect. Because certain things have very different effects on very different people. Like, for instance, nicknames. For some people, nobody cares. You could call them any nickname, they find it very friendly. But for other people, they're very insecure about it, which is very understandable. And somebody who's using nicknames might not necessarily know that that's the kind of implication it's having on you. So instead of saying you need to stop calling, not that they shouldn't stop calling you nicknames upon request, you really should stop that. But just as an example, instead of saying you need to stop calling me nicknames, it should probably focus more along the lines of why the nicknames bother you. Like, look, I'm uncomfortable with the nicknames, or I just really prefer to be called by my own name. It's just a lot easier for me to respond to. Something along those lines as an example. Because that's the part that the other person doesn't understand. That's what they're not getting. That's why you're having the problem in the first place. Because they don't realize the impact. And it's not because they're stupid. It's not because they're inconsiderate. But it's because, they're not omnipresent and don't have the information of the universe. We're human, unfortunately. I wish that we could read each other's mind, but we can't. So, when discussing these kinds of problems, and do it in a way where you're trying to communicate concern, not attack. That's what you want to focus on. Well, guys, that's going to be it for my video. Tell me if you like this new format or not. I'm trying out a bunch of different things, seeing what works, what doesn't work. So I'd really appreciate it if you guys tell me if you like this format. If you don't like this format, just let me know. Otherwise, make sure to hit that subscribe button and that bell button. I post every other week. And until next time, hear nothing and listen to all. Bye, guys!